Welcome to Settling's Not an Option. I'm Adam Nebbs, and I'm here with my co-host Amanda Stanhope. This show is for anyone out there who feels like they've settled for an unfulfilling life. Whether you've settled in a relationship, the work that you do, or how you feel about yourself, we're here to tell you that settling is not an option. If you're liking the show, please follow us on Spotify, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have any feedback about the show or would like to recommend a topic, you can email us at cheerstoNotSettling@gmail.com. Finally, to conclude the plug, if you feel so inclined, you can donate to us on Coffee, where we're aiming to buy some new audio equipment. We've got another guest today. Super excited for this guest. I've been telling Amanda about Gabi for ages and been watching her videos. So I'm really excited for the conversation today. Just a bit of a bio on Gabi. She's a thought leader with a vision of inspiring global change through individual empowerment. She offers a refreshing take on the wisdom that connects people to their inner truth and purpose. She's also a holistic healthcare practitioner, currently pursuing a PhD in natural medicine and a business degree. So welcome to the show, Gabi.
Thank you for having me.
Yes,
Happy to be here.
I think Adam's going to be geeking out a little bit in this episode, so we're going to see how this goes.
I'm always geeking out, though.
Let's get into each other's minds all the way.
Yes, I love it.
And it was also, the fact that Gabi's doing a PhD, so she understands the full-onness of doing a PhD. Like it's an interesting one. But before we jump onto that topic, in true S&O style, can you tell us about your journey, Gabi, and how you chose not to settle?
Of course. So as I was thinking about your show and the name about it, I was actually thinking about what settling is.
Sure.
And it kind of occurred to me that children don't settle. So there comes a time in our lives when certain expectations pile up and we've felt like disempowerment is more important than our ability to empower ourselves. So I think circumstances are what cause people to lose that sense of self-worth and to eventually feel like they can't settle for less. So as a child, I feel like I was fortunate enough to be exposed to good values, to know that effort is important and that trying your best and doing what your heart loves is what eventually leads you to not settle or to settle for a fulfilling life.
Right.
So in my case, I was born to a family of Ukrainian immigrants, and my mom was the one who was really dedicated to raising me with these good values, helping me nurture my sense of self and really start exploring what I'm interested in early on. So I could really attribute that to being a curious thinker, having an open mind, and exploring the world in an individual way from a very early age.
Mm-hmm.
So that led me to not settle until I was probably in like middle school, high school, because it's up until that time that I feel like kids have more of an individual say and take on the world. We're more prone to exploring, and really doing what interests you in this unique way. So up until then, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I had this very unique direction early on, and I really saw myself in the future having this serious purpose in the world. I always loved medicine, and healing people was something I was super passionate about. So all of that brought me to middle school, high school, where I realized that, and actually earlier than that even, I felt like I wasn't really conforming. So that was phase two sort of my life, where even though I wasn't settling based on my values, I was still holding to what I wanted to do and explore. I was very much in touch with myself and the world around me. But then when I dealt with society, trying to conform to the kids around me, to be taught what needs to be taught to me at school, I felt that resistance come up. So it was at that time I knew I was faced with this option. Do I keep being myself, like my mom was telling me, like once a child starts developing their own sense of identity and trying to find a place in the world, I knew that I need to either keep being myself at the expense of maybe not having so many friends, or stop doing what I love to fit in at school, or I need to just keep doing what I love and go for it. So eventually in high school, I realized that, I need to be this individual that I am. It's just who I am. And that led me down a very different path.
Yeah, I bet.
So ultimately, speaking of not settling, I think that it's an option that takes a lot of courage at times.
Yeah.
And by not conforming, I even felt these physical symptoms in me, which now looking back on it is just crazy to me how vulnerable we are. Like in school, I would get so shy at times and really felt like I didn't have a voice, even though I had a voice, a powerful one that was excited to explore things that I was interested in.
Right.
I couldn't do that at school. So in those environments, it's really easy for us to just shut out who we really are. And so I felt at times like my shoulders going forward. I developed this mild scoliosis, and
Oh yeah.
it was an instant response to the environment. Trying to be someone who you are turns you into like a black sheep at times.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that that is the cost I have to pay to get through it. And eventually, here I am, back to who I want to be. And so it's such a liberating time in my life when I finally get to speak out about what I'm interested in and to help people discover their own truths and discover things that we aren't taught at school and most of us aren't believers in for most of our lives. And when people have these epiphanies and they start to empower themselves, I think that's really such a beautiful recognition of who you are and what you can achieve. So my way of finding that came through these kind of stages, and I'm still discovering it in a fuller light. But I just know that I'm finally doing what I love, and I know that settling's not an option at this point.
There you go. That's right. I know. Yeah. When I get to imagine, because it happened so for you at such an early age, that like you mentioned, your mother having a role in that or having her hand in that, and that had to be a huge part for you to realize that so young.
Right.
Because so I know that I've suffered, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I think people who think like us, that have this broad view of the world and are very curious, and we don't fit in in a regular school environment. And I always struggled to fit in too, but I didn't ever talk to my parents about it or anything, or have them telling me to pursue what I wanted to pursue or whatever. So the point is, that just had to be a huge change or a huge difference for you so that you could come about that so early.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the tragic things about society nowadays, is when parents are not spending that important time with their kids to help them find themselves. Because how is a child going to know otherwise? When they're first starting, they need to be exposed to different things, let themselves really discover what their intuitive capacities are. And it's only through that hands-on learning and one-on-one time with a child that they can have that opportunity, until they kind of get into school and they get crushed into a system where they have to do what everyone else does. Right. And down the road, years and years later, they might just find themselves in a job they don't like, doing what they don't like, thinking that just because everyone else is doing it, that's what you have to do. Yeah. And that kind of applies to college as well. Like I found myself going down this really non-traditional route now. I study online, and that works for me. I totally realize it doesn't work for everybody, but it's all about finding what does work for you. And I do know that if I was in the college environment, I would be facing the same exact thing. I still wouldn't be fitting in. I'd be probably pushed into doing things I don't like, taking classes I don't like. Right. That really stinks. So if you realize that you have an option, which we always do, but we just don't know when and how to choose it at times. So I think that's where parenting gets so important. Like if you expose a child to that early on, they're going to have this kind of mode of empowerment through life where they know there's an option, and choosing is the best bet.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting point, I think, because I mean that's probably outside of the comfort of, you know, the family home, the first place where you learn that the world isn't, you know, as innocent and beautiful as you imagine when you're a child. I'm just wondering for anyone out there who, you know, doesn't have those supportive parents, or maybe doesn't have both parents with them, or whatever it may be, what are some strategies there? Because I think moving forward, this isn't going to change. If anything, it's probably going to get worse, and these pressures will still be put on kids as they grow up. So, what are your thoughts for anyone who isn't lucky enough, I suppose, to have some supportive parents?
So I would hope that there's at least one parent in a child's life that's a role model, that's giving them support as for like meeting their basic needs. Because it's when a child has those needs met, they at least feel safe in the world. They know how to express themselves, and they have developmentally what they need to grow their intellect, to feel like they are responsible for themselves, and they can make good choices going forward. If there's a one-parent household, I think the child needs to kind of gain responsibility early on, learn to fend for themselves. And that's a natural process. It's kind of as tough as it sounds, it's a little bit of like survival of the fittest. In this world. There are different circumstances, and it's still based upon what we can make of them. One parent might be better than two parents, or one parent might be better than a whole family that doesn't look or looks down on a kid and doesn't let them do what they want to do.
Right.
So in my case, my parents got divorced when I was 13, so I spent more time with my mom in those also pretty vulnerable adolescent years, I guess.
Yeah.
And it didn't, it had definitely a big impact on me, but it actually, I prescribed it to my strength at this point. Looking back, I realized that I had more of an opportunity to be independent. And me and my mom were kind of a team, supporting each other, going through the process.
Yeah, I bet.
And that gives you a lot of life skill, a lot of awareness early on, and a lot of wisdom you can gain from that too. So it's just more of, I would say it's those vulnerable kid years, probably below the age of 8. A lot of problems happen when a child doesn't have their needs met. And I think that really translates to societal issues with narcissism, with substance abuse, with a lot of people who have psychological issues just because they were abused or they weren't given enough from their parents. When you are deprived of love, that's just the problem. So if you don't have any love from any source, whether it's from one parent or a grandmother or from a best friend even, that's what can make it really challenging. But if you can find that love, if you were nourished enough to find yourself, I think that's really the crutch for life. Like you can move forward from that.
Yeah, I love that.
I couldn't agree more. So, yeah.
Just changing directions a little bit, because this is one that I'm really curious about. So for any of our listeners, and we'll obviously give some details at the end of the show about where you can go and find some videos that Gabi does. Gabi did a series on frequency. So what I'm really interested in is this idea that Gabi talks about, which is that we're vibrational beings and that we all kind of travel on different frequencies. I'm probably butchering the explanation there, but could you unpack that a little bit more for us? Because I imagine, and when we were talking the other day, you said, look, a lot of people think maybe this is quite a woo-woo subject, but what could you unpack that a bit more for us and the impacts that frequencies can have on us?
Sure. It's a really important topic to touch on because a lot of people don't see this connection to things that are outside of them. And I think really most people are stuck in this very physical way of seeing the world. It's just, we think the world is just what we see with our senses. It's what we learned at school. And really, we don't learn about the very basis of reality, which is where it gets really interesting and perplexing once you start to really unpack the whole thing. So essentially, if you go down to what matter is made of, everything is made of molecules, atoms. That's what we're taught at school. But really, a lot of people don't ask the question, what comes down even lower than that? Okay. What is an atom? What even is matter?
Right.
A lot of materialists will just stick to what we can see, just form, just kind of the hierarchy of what this stuff is in the world. But really, there's energy beneath all of it. If you keep shrinking down, it's energy. Right. And what is energy? It's just a free moving substance. And so if to look at the bigger scheme of things, the universe is a fluid model. Everything is just moving. And because of that movement and because of what energy is, we know that everything that we know as life is pretty much vibrating. So we live in a vibrational universe. And because of that, we're vibrational beings. Okay. And it all has to do with energy and how these frequencies are playing in to our lives. So I think what Adam really likes to talk about, look into, is what vibration even is. Why is this so important for us? So the main premise to vibration is that since everything is moving, everything also impacts it. And so there are different levels that we can look at this in terms of health, in terms of what it even does to physical matter. But every thought, every emotion, every action, everything carries a frequency of its own. And so since energy plays into light, it plays into how particles move, everything can be unpacked on this very technical basis. So we know that color has a frequency, for example, sound has a frequency. And because of that, we can really kind of tie frequency into everything that we see, but on a much deeper level. So when it comes to health, one of the more out there areas to talk about is that when our frequency lowers, so when we start thinking low vibrational thoughts, which carry low vibrational energies, all of that just means if you're in a low state, so say you're depressed or you're sad, or you're confused. All of these are lower vibrational energies. That puts you in this state of mind where you're physically vibrating at a lower level.
Okay.
So because of that, you're prone to health issues and different problems that can arise. And that also means, since everything's connected, that if you're at a lower vibrational level, you're going to be attracting lower vibrational things.
Right.
This is the real thing that we need to see, is that once we start vibrating at a certain level, and all of our life starts to seem like it carries that frequency.
Yeah.
The thoughts, the emotions, the people around us might be the same kind of people. And we might really not like it, but if we feel stuck and we keep doing the same things that keep us at that level, our whole life can kind of be seen as this lower vibrational reality. Everything gets dark. Everything seems like there is no option. So that kind of ties into the whole topic of settling being an option. If you are really attached to those lower vibrational thoughts, you think that that's it. You have to settle for it because that is your world. Mm-hmm. But once you start to implement these higher vibrational thoughts, so you start moving into a positive frequency level, you start doing what you love, you start expanding your potential through joyous activities and things like that, your whole mind state changes. And so your energy levels rise and you start to see the whole world opens up to you, because it's almost as if this portal opens to a higher vibrational realm. And that's really how it goes. A lot of people talk about the law of attraction. There's also the law of vibration. So all of this explains how physically, how we think and how we choose things all plays into this vibrational basis of all of life. And so when you start to unpack that, you see how everything really can be accounted to frequency. Mm-hmm. And Albert Einstein said, everything is vibration. Energy is vibration. Nikola Tesla said the same thing, how all the secrets of the universe can be tied to frequency, energy, vibration. That's really all there is to it.
Yeah.
So if we really boil it down, it gets super exciting to see how really there's a scientific basis to all that we know. But it's also like this deeper and more spiritual topic that we can go into.
Well, it's one of these things I've written about, not this, but certain things. And this is one of these things that I would label something that makes so much sense, at the same time makes absolutely no sense. You know, it's like,
I know what you mean.
When you're thinking about it, you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And then it's like, hold on, wait a minute. No, it doesn't. Because then you look around and you see all the material things around you, and you look at your hands and you look at your body and you're like, no, these things are really here and they're not moving. You know,
well, that's the thing
they're
too.
not
The interesting thing,
or you don't think
it's because our eyes can't pick up on it. All of this goes down to such a micro level.
Right.
And that's the thing. A lot of the world, people see it through this macro perspective. People are used to just judging things based on how they are, physical objects, but everything is moving. The chair we're sitting on is also moving, but it's at this really, really tiny level, microscopic level. So we can't see it. But down to the basis, everything is just energy. And we're all cooperating and joining together in the same energetic way. So it's really neat to kind of expand that perspective. See how it all comes together.
Fascinating, though.
I know.
Like
I know. Here we go. We're geeking out.
That's my first geeking out moment. Yeah, it happened there. You probably see my face somewhere on the camera. But I think it's so true, because I think sometimes we don't know maybe that we are in a low frequency, and all of a sudden all these low frequency things start getting attracted to us. And, you know, it seems to derail our day. I can definitely think of moments like that where I'm like, no, like this is going to be a good day. I'm in a good headspace. But maybe subconsciously there's things there that are making my frequency lower. And it attracts people, like, you know, maybe people with a low frequency or, events or whatever it may be. So it's interesting, because if we look at that deeper level, maybe we need to go inside and think a little bit more about that and how that's attracting things that we don't want in our lives.
Right.
For sure. Yeah. And a lot of it really is.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go on.
No, I was just going to say that it makes me think of a question, because, all right, so I just wondered how you would respond to this, because like Adam said, you can start out a day maybe feeling good, and then all of a sudden your mood could change where you're vibrating in a low frequency. I'll start getting the vocabulary down here.
You'll get it.
But then, and you know, and sometimes you just tell yourself, you try to talk yourself into being in a good mood again, or you can try to convince yourself that maybe some perceived threat isn't real, or you're worrying about something you don't need to be worrying about, whatever. You try to talk yourself out of it. But we all know that doesn't always work. So I guess what would you say to that? So when you're at that low frequency, how do you bring yourself back up to a higher one once you become aware of it? I guess becoming aware of it is probably the first step, but then what do you do?
Mm-hmm. All right. So if you really start to unpack why that low frequency is there, usually it comes down to something that happened to you before. Usually it's many layers of things that happen to you that disempower you. Sometimes that disempowerment runs so deep that you can't even remember when it started. You might have had a trauma happen to you before from somebody. It could be layers of doubt, criticism, times you messed up in your life. All of that needs to be worked with on some level. Okay. And it can get difficult because we're stuck with the problem we're facing right now, which is that resistance in everyday life, when stuff seems difficult, when we don't know why we can't get out of that state. But there could be this subconscious program that's deep inside. So a lot of people talk about this. And at times, it isn't something that we can unpack ourselves. Sometimes hypnotherapy helps and different modalities like that, where people can really access through hypnosis those states of consciousness where you can rule out what the problem was, and through different techniques really take that out. And it is possible. So pretty much anything can be worked with, but sometimes we can't consciously remember because our brain tends to protect us by suppressing anything really traumatic. So if it causes a lot of pain, we don't know why. We're kind of experiencing the after effect of it now, but consciously we don't know where it came from. But if we do, which a lot of us can recall times where, there was a perceived threat and we didn't deal with it the right way, there are ways to kind of circumvent that right now. And I talked about this in one of my latest videos where I said, I really like the idea of fake it till you make it. A lot of people, they don't like this concept, but I really see this as a way of bypassing the way the trigger arises in the present moment. Okay. So even though the problem is there, what we're essentially doing is making what I like to call like a little quantum leap in the present moment. So say the root is there. But when you're dealing with the problem right now, you are acting in a state that you consciously choose in which you're a new person. That threat doesn't have to exist for you right now. So it's something that takes a lot of practice. And the first time you do it, it's going to be hard. Second time you do it, it's going to be hard. But if you think about it, anytime we have a fear, anything pre-existing from the past, the only way to get through it is if we make that leap. And every single person who's gotten over something from past, which I think all of us have dealt with things, but if we're successful, ultimately, it means that we have kind of gone through that phase of faking it till we make it, going over the things that have happened to us that made us feel like we can't keep going. So in order to not be stuck, we have to keep pushing forward and just draw in more of those higher vibrational thoughts, keep telling ourselves good things, like affirmations help a lot. And just feeling like, all right, I need to really focus on the right things right now. And eventually that's going to replace the old things and form new habits, which are ultimately going to make a new us. So it's just really a process. And when we get stuck, we just need to kind of keep going forward until it's a habit. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the big takeaway for anybody listening to this, because I think the three of us have already kind of gone through that process in our own ways and are at different levels of being able to, deal with the negative vibrations or whatever you want to say. But for those out there who haven't gotten there yet, I think that it's important to realize that it's not something that's just going to happen overnight. And it's something you're going to have to work on for quite a while. And you just have to keep working at it and not give up on it. Or not settle. There we go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But just to encourage people, to let them know, like, we can all sit here and talk about it and like it's so easy and make it sound like it's easy to do, and it's just simply not easy, but it's definitely worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of people come into this field and they look into spirituality because they're just looking for that magic pill. Like, that's what we all want to do. We want the quick fix. We want to get out of our suffering. I think the quick fix is understanding that you have a choice.
There you go.
That can be an epiphany for a lot of people. So you don't have to settle. You don't need to be part of that old reality. But yes, now you need to be committed to it. Like, you have a goal. You can think of it as any other goal in your life. Like, now you're committing to this. And every single day you need to be part of that new version of you, who you want to become. So you can't just end it. It's not like, or it's like breaking a bad habit. Like, you want to stop smoking, and every single day you wake up, you don't pull for a cigarette. You can't stop midway through the process. You must just persevere. And ultimately, you can be whatever you want to be. It doesn't really matter our upbringing or what we lacked, because when we become conscious enough of our potential, which is something I really want to deliver to people, that we are so much more powerful and full of potential than many of us think. And so even hearing that across the screen for a lot of people might be one of the most powerful things to them. If nobody has ever told them, to find someone who believes in them, who says that this is really possible, it can be proven by science that we could shape ourselves into what we want to be. We need to learn about ourselves and we need to commit to this process that's going to transform us for the better. And from that point, we just need to keep doing it until it's reality.
Right.
I think that's an interesting thing as well. It kind of ties in between what you said, Gabi, and Amanda as well. But this concept that when you awaken, you don't just wake up one day and you've awakened and, you know, that's it, you're done. Cool.
Right.
Excellent. Go on with life as it was. I was naive enough to think that. So if there's anyone out there thinking, oh, really? I was hoping that it would happen. It doesn't work that way. Every single day is another layer, I suppose, of this awakening process. It's just, as Gabi said, a choice. You start to, I suppose, challenge your thoughts. And that was a big thing for me, is my brain was constantly bringing all these thoughts in, quite often low frequency thoughts. And it was really draining my energy and wasn't bringing, you know, attracting a lot of good things into my life. But what I realized, as you said, is the choice. These thoughts would come into my mind and I'd realize this isn't me. This is basically just my thought machine processing and creating things, usually out of habit. You know, we've trained our brains to do that over many years unconsciously. But, you know, it's nice when you can sit there and go, well, thanks for that, brain, but that's actually not applicable today. Maybe let's have a different thought. And it just seems to change your frequency. So I think for anyone out there, we're all going through it. You know, nobody's got it right. Even the Dalai Lama or Eckhart Tolle or whoever, they're still probably battling things every day. I'm sure they are.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
So a question as well, because we were talking about science and spirituality. So that's something I'm interested in. There's some really thought-provoking leaders out there at the moment. So Dr. Dan Siegel, and I encourage anyone to look up his work. That changed my perspective on some really big things. And somebody by the name of Mark Gober, they have talked a lot about a consilience between hard science, I guess if you could call it that, and spirituality, and have spent a lot of time trying to convince these very sometimes narrow-minded hard scientists that spirituality has a place and can be tested. Could you talk a bit about that, Gabi, and what you've noticed in your journey around those two kind of disciplines coming together?
So the biggest problem, I guess, with anybody who is trying to figure out the way things work, which is why spirituality and science exist in the first place. Somebody has ventured to discover what is really going on. Let's explore more and find more answers to explain what's going on. How can we deliver solutions to people? And what happens is we find separateness. Anytime we start to dig deep into something, we find that there is something that we don't have a full picture of. And in faith and spirituality or in religion, a lot of times stuff is left open-ended. It is the way it is. And at some points, and puts a period on it and says, you know, that's just what it is. This is faith. The rest we can just leave to some unknowing source, or we shouldn't expect a solution. In science, the same thing happens, except scientists tend to say that, you know, what we know, most of what we know, and the rest, they just kind of flick off. It is what it is as well. And if we really dig deeper, which a lot of us now are starting to, and this has been going on for hundreds of years, you find to see there are inconsistencies. And some people have wanted to connect the dots. The deeper you go, the more you realize that there must be something more to this. In terms of science, a lot of people ask, so what really is the universe? What is operating all of this matter? Once you get to the level of frequency of vibration, you start to think, okay, well, how can we explain then how everything comes together? And so this concept of God comes in, and people really ask, what is consciousness? So what I'm now studying, what I've gotten to, is that quantum physics and quantum mechanics is really the bridge between religion or spirituality and science altogether. So the unanswered question between the two is like, what is the commonality? How can we bridge all of the concepts together, and how can we fill in the blanks to understand what is all of it? And how is oneness really a thing that creates this concept of totality in the world? So, and quantum mechanics, this really introduced the idea of consciousness. So this is the center of what I do, what I focus on. And it's the basic explanation for consciousness is the sea of possibilities. It is all the potential, and it's the ground of being. So it connects the dots perfectly, because consciousness explains how everything is interconnected, how energy plays into everything at a distance. This is how everything can work. And there's like the butterfly effect, where say a butterfly flaps its wings in Texas and there's going to be a tsunami halfway across the world, and phenomenons like this that otherwise science or spirituality just wouldn't be able to explain, or psychic phenomena like remote viewing, in which one person on one continent might be seeing something occurring halfway across the world.
Yeah.
Science just can't explain these things. And instead of shutting the door and saying, you know what, there is no explanation, that ordinary classical physics just couldn't explain. A lot of their laws just dealt with physical matter. This is the way it is, and that's it. And later on, theoretical physicists found that there needs to be another explanation. So when quantum physics came in, it really started weaving everything together. And it's interesting to look in terms of history, how in terms of this dichotomy between religion and science, it's always existed. Like Galileo is a great example. He's like the father of physics, but a lot of people don't know that he spent the last years of his life being under house arrest because the church totally ostracized him for his ideas.
Yeah.
He tended to believe that there was this concept that the sun is in the middle of the universe and the earth is revolving around it. So it's very similar to what we believe today. And because
what a crazy idea. No.
Yeah, right. To now it seems like that, but back then he was seen as a huge threat.
Right.
And a lot of people now still see that. And so when you try to connect the dots, there's going to be someone in the spiritual community, the religious community, that's going to say, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit into my paradigm of reality. But quantum physics is really proposing and has proven how everything is really tangled up in this universe, how things are correlated and cooperate to explain how things didn't make sense before.
Yeah.
So as we add this to the human being, how we can use quantum physics, it really helps us understand why consciousness and why our control over consciousness can help us achieve what we want in life, how we can heal ourselves, which is what I focus on with my medical degree right now, is how utilizing our consciousness is the most important tool to healing ourselves, to looking at really why the problem set in. Because since anything that occurred to our consciousness, our personal control of it, can create a problem, it's the same way that we can fix the problem. In the scientific communities, they look at it like there's an issue, we need to solve it or cure it with medications and with treatments like that that don't actually deal with the root.
Right.
And so that's something that really led me down this path to understanding that there's just more to it. And it's really sad to see that after so many hundreds of years, we haven't gone towards this understanding that the ancients told us about how everything cooperates, how we can heal naturally, how we can see how everything's connected. And instead, we're just pushing towards that scientific materialist view, where now a lot of this is seen as pseudoscience, even though it has been proven. And we can really use this to help shape our lives for the better.
Yeah. Now, I do let it back up a minute here because so what is quantum physics? I mean, I've heard the term, but and it sounds to me like it is kind of a science of the unseen, where hard science, if you want to call that, traditional science or whatever, is more studying things that you can see and feel. And is quantum physics and more dealing with the things you can't see and feel? In
part, yeah, for sure. Well, because the basic quantum physics comes from the word quanta. Quanta is an indivisible unit of energy. So it's what's at the very basis of all of it. And so quantum physics really looks at how that plays into the interconnected mass of everything, of all of energy around us.
Okay.
And so it really, looking at consciousness, we see that this is the substance of which all things are made. It's what everything comes from. And through potentials, and a lot of quantum physics concepts have to do with the fact that there is consciousness playing into everything that exists. And everything that is created comes from that same model of consciousness. So one really good example to look at, which might be interesting for the viewers out there, is something called the double slit experiment. So the double slit experiment.
Okay, got it.
So this really introduces quantum physics. So imagine you have
Just gonna write that down.
Sure.
He's geeking out. Go.
Here we go. Have fun. So let's say that we have two walls, right?
Okay.
And there are two slits between them.
Yep.
And you have someone shooting a light through a hole in the wall. And so what you expect to see from the other side are two just beams of light. Ordinary classical science experiment.
Yep.
But what scientists found was that when somebody was observing the slits of light, the whole setup, the particles were moving in a different way. They were being observed as the light beams going through.
Okay.
So you could see the two light beams at the other end of the wall. But when somebody wasn't viewing the experiment, so there was no observer, there was no consciousness there to be a part. So imagine consciousness is like a third party, a presence, seeing the experiment being done. All of a sudden, the wave pattern completely changed.
Really?
So the light didn't travel like a light. It came out as just a singularity. Mm-hmm. It was a single beam. So there was no observer. So the response that you'd expect to see from the experiment wasn't actually executed. So this completely blew people's minds.
Yeah, it's blowing my mind right now.
So, there you go. So there is no scientific explanation for why this would be. Why what you would expect to see if, you're just shooting light there. It's as if the light has a consciousness of its own, and it's interacting with your ability to see it. So this, even though it doesn't mean that a person had to be there, but it's if somehow in the experiment it was seen that a measurement was taken, that's why the end result changed.
Yeah.
So, but a lot of times this gets translated to the fact that everything in reality needs to be observed to be created. So it's when at the same time, this goes even deeper with if we expect certain things, that really plays into what is actually going to end up visible in our reality.
Exactly. Right.
What we choose to see is what is. What we think that is what actually is.
Exactly.
And so it gets super fascinating with that.
Well, and if you even bring it down to a very easy example, because I don't know, I had this dawn on me when I was a kid because I think weird. I mean, I remember being very young when I thought this. And I remember thinking, like, I was looking at some crayons or something, and I'm like, I wonder if these crayons are the same color to other people. Like, it just dawned on me that not everybody sees things the same way. And then, like, for example, and maybe this was why I was thinking of it, because my mom wore glasses. And, like, I'd put her glasses on and walk around the house and stuff, and I couldn't see anything. And so that maybe put the thought in my head that people see things differently. But I think it kind of, so if you can accept that we don't all see things the same, we don't all hear the same things or whatever, then it's not so hard to make that leap that there isn't anything that is absolute. It's all kind of relative to the consciousness, I guess.
Exactly.
In that moment. So, I mean, because it sounds like such a far-fetched idea, but when you bring it down to the base level like that, and like I say, you can accept something that we all know to be true, it's really not that far-fetched. It's just hard. Mm-hmm. It's just hard to visualize is all.
Right. Because we're all kind of living in our own model of reality. Yeah. If we think about how many factors play into what we think we know and what we actually see, has to do with so many things that make us different from our upbringing, from everything that we've been exposed to individually. Mm-hmm. So obviously that would explain why our filter of truth, what we think is true in the world, has to do with what we've been exposed to. Right. A lot of us, our ideas have to do with what we were fed through the media, through parents, through our environment. And so how then is consciousness played into it, it would seem, if we kind of already determine our future based on our past? Mm-hmm. But that's when we need to realize that we have that role as the conscious observer. We get to choose now what reality we want to make of it. And that's kind of what happened with Newtonian physics, going back to science. Everything was cause and effect based. Yeah, right. And so now quantum mechanics is more saying that everything is manipulable, everything is fluid. And so consciousness adds this whole new standard. Consciousness is like a self-aware mass, the sea of potential. And we are also those potentials. So to realize that is also super liberating. Like we have that choice, and it has to do with the fact that everything changes. And a lot of times our lives change in ways that we can't even explain when we start to change our thoughts. And a lot of people, they just attribute that to random chance, you know, to synchronicities or stuff like that. But that too is part of what you've expected, what you've kind of programmed into your mind, and you start to see that.
Right.
So I'd say for people who really want to make that leap, who need to start somewhere, just take baby steps with changing how you see the world and feel like you are part of something that needs your control in this positive way. The more you stick to those positive thoughts, you start to do things that make you feel valuable and that helps you bring value to the world, you're actually going to have that chance to bring value into the world. Everything starts to align with your needs and bring you to that higher frequency level. It's kind of like riding a roller coaster where you have that build up, and then after that, really you see the results to everything that you've put into it. That's a big part of it.
Yeah. Did you have something, Adam, or else I had a quick follow?
Oh, I've got a few things.
I know you do, so I'll let you go. I'll let you go.
A big question. So if you know, it basically, for something to exist, I suppose, it needs to be observed. You know, if we look at, say, the Big Bang, for example, you know, the creation of everything. So where does that tie into it? You know, like this idea of, like, was there a high entity that needed to observe things for things to come into creation? Or does quantum mechanics have a different perspective?
This is a very simple question, Gabby.
Oh, right, for sure. This is like the beginning of time. Well, okay, we could have a stab at it. You know, it's a really interesting question. All right, so first of all, what we've been saying about consciousness is that it's the sea of possibility, right? And it would seem that there needs to be some creative agency behind it. That's the way that one of my professors, this great guy named Amit Goswami, he's a quantum physicist, that's how he explains the concept of God. This is what science has never endeavored to do, and spirituality kind of goes around. This would explain how there is kind of this omnipresent force around us that guides us towards the totality of all things. So the Big Bang occurred as a way of, so the universe was founding itself. So maybe there was a higher force around it, but this was its way of the universe coming to a place of observation in itself. The universe becoming a place of oneness, the source for everything else that would come from it. And so we can see how we're extensions of that same force that created everything. And now, coming to observe that, we are observing separateness, which is a total paradox. Right. Because God, oneness, collective consciousness, that's all about the totality of all of things, us all being connected to that same field, which we operate and that operates because of us. So to go all the way back, it would only seem plausible that that is what created everything else. But there's always been this kind of, this greater force around all of it. So we can see God, or that consciousness, as kind of the quantum field. It's what's playing into everything that is accessible to us. And that's the field of opportunity. That's what really allows us to feel like we are part of that same wholeness. And so really, we are part of Source. We are all individual expressions of it, which explains why our potential is also so closely linked to it. So that's part of it. It would take a while to unfold in detail.
No, I was going to say, which is really what a lot of religions teach, and I'm not that familiar with any other religion other than Christianity, but they really do teach that everything is connected. But I think people just miss that part somehow. You know what I mean? I don't know why they do, but people tend to, well, I guess I do know why, but that's a different discussion. But it's not that far-fetched from what religion teaches, actually.
It's true. It's just that the dots aren't connected, like I said. They always kind of leave something open-ended, and still they don't interpret science as being the explanation for some of this at that quantum level.
Right. Yes.
And a lot of people don't understand how physically we have this innate superpower as people, how everything vibrates at a certain level. And faith really has a lot of pluses that are tied to quantum physics. Like prayer is a great example of us focusing on an intention and seeing that kind of come from the field. We are accessing collective consciousness by creating the source of that connection. And a lot of people wouldn't be able to understand that because that isn't something that's told to you. But theoretically, it makes perfect sense. What's taught in Christianity and many religions is the cause for oneness. It's of being together, being connected, and finding that power within you. But still, oftentimes, I feel like that separateness is conveyed. Sometimes there's fear as part of the picture, fear being one of the lower vibrational energies. And so if people are fearing, say, heaven or hell, that split, or they don't know what God is, they're finding themselves separate from it, to feel to an extent that the God is within you, you're part of that. And so you have the full power to tap into this infinite source is what can change a lot of people's opinion about being stuck to religion, and sometimes makes them convert to spirituality. But even then, they might lack this understanding that it's all really driven by how the universe works.
I love that. It's because it all centers on oneness, doesn't it? And I think what can happen with religion sometimes, and this happens in all facets of life, is Christianity might say, oh, our religion is the supreme religion. No other religions have any ideas like, follow this. And it's where we're missing the bigger message, which is we are all connected. There's no one religion that's better than another. Like if that's the argument that you're trying to make, you're losing the point. You're losing that higher point. And I think that's what I always like with Eckhart Tolle is he talks about spiritual messages, Jesus or all the various other entities, these people that come into the world as awakened beings and try to teach us. And some people will take some of those learnings, but usually misconstrue them, misinterpret them, and then we arrive at where we are today. It got me thinking a bit about this idea of us all being on equal parity. I met somebody yesterday who was I think it was almost like a universal test for me because I know how I would have previously responded. Somebody who is very, very high up in the university, very well connected, clearly very well educated and had a lot of, I'd say was probably quite well off in life. I know and previously I would have been just completely like amazed by this person and thinking, oh my gosh, why can't I be like that? I want to impress this person. This person's so much more important than other people I've met. But it just made me look yesterday and think, well, I don't really see the difference between someone like that with all the titles and accomplishments or whatever you want to call them, and somebody, like the homeless guy who lives just down the road, that I'll see. Like, I don't see the difference there. So, I mean, I want to get your thoughts on this idea, because I think so often we've got so many people who just want to impress someone else and say, I've got all these titles and all these things. But yeah, hopefully there's a question in there somewhere.
There's a question in there somewhere.
I got you. Yeah, it's a great point to make. Yeah. So coming back to oneness versus separateness, I think one way to look at this is as defining the one that sees separateness as kind of the ego self. And then seeing oneness side coming from what we call the quantum self sometimes. So here's an interesting point that I really wanted to throw in somewhere today.
Oh, perfect.
A lot of people think that the ego needs to be destroyed, obliterated, killed, whatever. But if we see how everything comes together, I'd say it's around 25% ego self and 75% quantum self to see the whole picture. You absolutely need to be present within the ego self to make a connection like Adam made the other day. That's a perfect example of you being conscious within your identity, knowing where you came from. And ego is simply you defending your needs, being your own person, your own identity.
Right.
And so you wouldn't want to get rid of that. But being able to make that higher awareness connection is where that consciousness comes in. It's where even though you know that you're separate because you're essentially you've been born here to be separate, to experience your physicality in that separate way. But at the same time, you can see how it's all connected. And when we can see that, we can exchange empathy for other people. We don't need to dominate over other people. We don't need to exert our ego in that kind of egocentric, narcissistic way. That's what creates the problem, which a lot of people say is why the ego is bad and why all people shouldn't practice their ego or exert it in any way. But it shouldn't be seen like that. Really, you're just your essential self. And if you keep your ego under control, which just means that you can see the connections outside of it. You can be in your empowered self And to achieve success, you need to understand that. To get anywhere in life, to be happy, those are all expressions of the ego. And so to be able to see other people as a part of you, an extension of you, and as all being part of your reality where we could all coexist and be happy together, that's just that higher level understanding, where a lot of people get called down for having a big ego because maybe they weren't nurtured while they were little to understand that their needs can be met and other people's needs can be met. And we can all be friends and, and live in this reality peacefully and in this connected way. And so people try to step on other people's boundaries and do all these things. Abuse comes in. That all has to do with this inability to learn how to express your ego self, your essential true self, in a fair, just, and kind way.
Right.
And so, yeah, oneness is if you can arrive at that understanding of oneness, you can really transcend from just being stuck in the ego, just perceiving yourself as being some solo part in this world where it's all about you or it's all about you achieving something, to understanding that you're here to be a part. And you were given this opportunity from the universe to experience your separateness in the most beneficial way.
Right.
So that's how I like to think about it.
Well, and I don't know why I'm going above and beyond what you were just talking about, but it just reminded me of kind of my take on heaven is that we have heaven right here. It's ours to create. And people think it's somewhere else that you get to later on. And I think they miss the point that if we could all find that oneness where we are, when it's just not, I don't believe is ever going to happen. But if we did all find that oneness and we're all working together for the common consciousness or whatever you want to call it, that is heaven. That's what we're here to create. That's what we've been given the opportunity to create for ourselves. Whether we take that opportunity or not is up to us.
Exactly. That's the goal.
That kind of where the quantum physics side of it seems to play into me too, because you're creating your own reality. So you're creating your own heaven or your own hell.
Exactly.
Whichever you want. Yeah.
Yeah. That really makes us feel like we're in control, like we have the power to be as part of this reality, but to create our own world. Because really there's an infinite amount of abundance, energy, resources, people, situations that we can all tap into.
Right.
And so it sounds kind of utopian to think that we could all have heaven on earth, but it's because we all perceive this reality in different ways. So many people are in that separate form of it.
Yeah.
In those lower states of consciousness that we're dealing with this world where it seems like we're all so separate. That's why it's so hard to find ourselves being as members of the same world or to connect with other people that came from such different views, from different circumstances, because given their things that they were exposed to, they just can't land at the same state.
Yeah.
But I think all that we can do really is to focus on ourselves and our ability to now share ourselves with the world in this way. The more of us who rise to this level, if we're willing to contribute to society in a positive way, we need to be these high vibrational beings. We need to deliver the message by doing what we love, by being good to other people, to just sharing the positive vibrations and to encourage other people, hopefully, to all do the same thing.
Yeah.
And that kind of starts this domino effect. I think more people are going to be realizing this now because we have more opportunities, we have more freedom. And even though we see this split really occurring between people who are lost, confused, maybe become more stuck, other people are kind of going across the chasm between the two. They're deciding that, I want to create the most out of this time when we really feel like we have a choice. What do we do now? We can stay our old selves, we can surrender to the stuff that comes our way, or we can make from this a new precious opportunity for us to be that greatest version.
Yeah.
And so that's really the purpose.
I like it. I think the pandemic's probably accelerated people's need to look inward because there was a lot of time, depending where you were in the world, to sit back and reflect on who you are. And I think that's the first step to doing that. But Eckhart Tolle, always name dropping Eckhart Tolle, but he says
I know. I knew that's where you were going.
He says with each person that awakens, it makes it easier for the next person.
Right.
Again, with that collective consciousness. And so I'm hopeful. How are we going for time, Amanda? Do we have time for one more big question before the optional questions?
If Gabby's good with it.
Yeah. Gabby's
sure.
like, please stop.
We're quite a bit over on time. Let's put it that way. However, if Gabby's up for it, I'm up for it. So
let's keep rolling. We'll have a
all right,
speed
let's
round
keep
in
rolling.
the end. Let's do it.
Well, we kind of talked about this a little bit offline. So I suppose at least we've kind of talked through it. So back to talking about Dr. Dan Siegel, and he talked about this idea, you know, when his dad was on his deathbed, and his dad was a hard scientist who never believed in anything beyond what the hard sciences could prove. When he was on his deathbed, he asked Dan, you know, what do you think is going to happen when I die? And Dan said, well, where do you think you came from before you're on this planet? You were energy. I think you're just going to return to that energy stream. And it just took this person who was very vulnerable, obviously end of his life, you know, into this really calm place to think, oh, I'm just returning to energy. That's all that's happening. So my question to you would be around, you know, we came from energy. We're probably going to go back to energy. We're physically manifested at the moment, and we've got however many years. What's the purpose of, you know, like this time on Earth? You know, like why is it important for us to cherish these moments where we're physically here rather than, you know, where we were before, where we were just energy, just going through that consciousness?
All right. Well, to think that we're here right now is the most important thing, is to be aware of yourself given where you are. So we don't know, or most of us can't consciously understand why we're here, who brought us here, what is the sole purpose for us. But if we understand that as we're here, we need to make the most out of this experience. We are experiencing something new, and we are meant to evolve in some new way for ourselves. I think that we're here to be a part of this soul journey, this process of going through numerous lives, to develop ourselves in different ways, to be exposed to different things. And our identity follows through. I really think that as we experience different lifetimes, as we're on different paths, we really tap into different expressions of ourself. We learn to deal with different things, and we develop this sort of soul level wisdom that is carried through. And I think we can inherit. Some of us in this life, we're born and we really feel like we're at a higher level. It doesn't always have to do with being exposed to certain situations, conditions. Some of us feel like we have more wisdom in us, or we have a higher purpose. And if we come to that awareness, we just know that we need to do something with it. Some people don't feel that need to really tap into their purpose, to do something meaningful. So maybe they're at a different level. If we really go into this point, we can see how we need to have empathy for people who may be at very different points of their soul development journey. We are all energy, so we're all experiencing different things. We also can't stop people from experiencing what they need to progress along their journey with their cycle, to get their experience, to maybe learn through difficulties, mistakes, hardships, because everyone gets a lesson from it. If we don't get a lesson consciously through it in this lifetime, maybe we'll get it in the next.
Right.
But it's most important to focus on our own right now, and to see how developing our consciousness, or expanding it, to understand our purpose and to see why we're here, is this essential question, which is surprising for maybe people like us to see how some other people don't get it. But we have to coexist with them. We need to be understanding that everybody's at their own place, and that for us to understand it means that we need to hold that space for people in a loving way, to do what we do in order to create more of that peace on earth, the heaven model, which is going to work. At least it's going to be what we here are meant to do. And that's what we can know for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
Love it.
Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, I might
We're just asking you to answer all the questions of the universe. No big deal.
I know. Look,
oh, it's fun.
That's what we can name it. All the answers are here on this podcast. Listen.
Yeah.
It's a very existential talk we're having today.
It's very.
It is.
So I might throw to you, Amanda, if you want to go through the non-optional questions with Gabby.
Oh, sure. Oh, good thing I had them printed out, because I usually
throw you under the bus.
No, I have no problem doing it. I'm just like, oh, do I have them? Yes, I do. All right, Gabby, are you ready? These are the tough ones.
Sure.
We gave you the easy questions already. So what is one thing you do when your frequency is low?
All right. One thing I do, the obvious thing, is I listen to music. I go for a walk. I do something that cheers me up. Maybe I spend some time with my dog. I think a lot of simple pleasures really come into this.
Yep.
For that instant boost, you could just turn on a song you like, you could meditate, you can just need to switch out of that mode. And I think when we get used to, instead of diving into this deep, dark state, if we just learn to change our mood, to change and physically change our brainwave state, to change how we're actually operating on a physical level, we can avoid going into that lower vibrational state long term.
Sure.
So
yeah, because
I
it
usually
really
like
does,
to think about it that way.
Yeah, because it really does change so quickly, or you can change your vibration so quickly sometimes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 2. Who is your favorite musician?
Ooh, it's a tough one. I love music, but I probably don't have like a one favorite musician. In terms of like more melody kind of orchestra music, I really love Hans Zimmer. I think he has this phenomenal type of music, but I love different singers, and I love 80s music to get me in the mood. But so that's all over. My playlist is all the way from alternative to 80s.
Yeah.
I also speak Russian, so I've got Russian music in there.
Oh, it's just, that would be fun.
It's a full spread. So it's really hard to choose one, and it's so based on your mood, I think. Like one day you can be listening to one type of music, the other day you're just in a totally different place. Sure. And you're always kind of finding what resonates with you in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I like my options.
Yes, you don't have to settle for what kind of music you're doing.
See, even there.
There you go. All right, and what is your favorite season and why?
I really love spring. I always have. And I really think it's due to me living in the Northeast, because I don't love winter. Yeah. And it's kind of like I just wait throughout the winter for the summer to come back again. Kind of has to do with how we're always seeing like we're lacking what we want, and we kind of want something that we don't have. And because of that, once the winter starts, I'm just waiting for the summer to come back. And I love seeing the seasons change. And when the flowers come out and the animals are all kind of giddy and excited as I am. It's
kind
really
of that
great.
Rebirth. Yep.
Yeah, it's a beautiful transition.
Yep. Awesome. Yes, I'd have to agree. How about you, Adam? What's your favorite season?
Probably summer. Because I mean, in Tasmania, it's so miserable during the during winter. And when the sun comes out, I just feel like it just gives me energy. So I have to say summer.
But does it get really hot there in the summer, or?
Yeah, it gets stupidly hot. Like, this is the annoying thing. When it's winter time here, it's freezing. Like, people come from the mainland of Australia and we just laugh because they're all wearing giant puffer jackets and stuff because they're so freaking cold. Whereas we're kind of more used to it. But then in the summertime, it's like stupidly hot. So I don't know. It's good in a way, but you don't want to be outside too much when it's summertime.
Yeah, see, that's the part I don't like. I don't like it if it's too hot.
Yeah.
That's why we're good where we are in the Northeast. It doesn't get too hot. It doesn't get too cold. I mean, it'll get pretty darn cold for a couple days or so, but we kind of have it perfect over here in the Northeast area. So
true. It's nice to see the transitions too.
Have you guys had a white Christmas over there?
Have we?
Absolutely.
Always. No,
that's a normal thing, is it?
I like to try to make Adam feel really stupid because he doesn't know anything about the U.S., which is not fair. But this is a game that we play. No.
Let's fool him. Let's say it's hot here.
Yes. No, we don't always have a white Christmas, but it's always winter. I mean, we always get, like, where I live, I looked it up once when we first met, but I think we average about 12 feet of snow a year.
Wow, that's so cool.
And I would think you guys get quite a bit of snow where you are, Gabby, too, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. I don't know how many feet, but it definitely depends. Like last winter wasn't snowy, but almost always you get quite a bit.
I live in Michigan I'm always bad with east and west. I'm on the west side of Michigan, right on the lake. We live maybe 8 miles from the lake, Lake Michigan. Sorry, Adam, Lake Michigan. And so we get a lot of snow because we get snow off of the lake.
Right.
So we do get more snow than other areas around us. But yeah, no, we get a lot of snow. We usually have a white Christmas, but not always.
Soon we'll tell.
Yes. All right, that's enough of weather forecasting for
Yeah.
today.
It's an
Any other
interesting way to
concluding
end this, right?
thoughts?
But Gabby, what like where could our listeners find
Oh,
you?
yeah,
Where
yeah.
places?
Well, yeah. At the moment, I'm really active on Instagram. So
Okay.
over there, my handle is Gabi Kovalenko, GabiKovalenko.
Okay.
Soon, I'm gonna have my YouTube channel up very soon.
Cool.
Hoping next week or the week after. So
Good.
guys will see more frequent content from me there too.
Awesome.
But for
Yeah,
now,
definitely put your Instagram handle. I got to get all this the technical words in here. The Instagram handle in the description for
cool. Thank you.
for both the podcast and the video here. So yeah, for sure. All right, I think we're good then, right? So I'll wrap things up. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So if you are watching this on YouTube, please hit subscribe, leave us a comment, because both of those things, even if you just put a heart in the, or whatever, or something, an emoji in the comment, that will help us get a little more traction on YouTube. If you are listening to this, you can, well, if you're listening to it, you know where you're listening to it at, but you can find us on Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, if you want to listen rather than watch the video. And of course, we're on Coffee, where you could be also generous and donate as little as $1 to us to help keep things going here. And you can find us, Adam or I, on LinkedIn, or cheers to not settling @gmail.com. If you want to send us a message, we're always here to answer any questions. So with that, I will say, cheers to not settling.
Cheers. Everybody show some love.
Yes. Take care.
All right. Take care. Thank you for having me.